Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where we are breaking the pattern of covering one chapter of Ecclesiastes per week. Instead, we're doing half a chapter, a quarter of a chapter. I mean, it's not that long. It's about half of chapter 5. I'm going to remedy this, of course, in a couple weeks when I do Ecclesiastes 5, verse 10 through the end of chapter 6, because that's all about money and riches and stuff like that. That's all one section, but here, we're just going to stop and focus on the first 9 verses. This may well be shorter than most of the other lessons. I have no idea. Who knows how long I'm going to yap for, because this is a very significant part to me. One of the reasons why I'm breaking this out is, well, the text basically forces me to. It's the religion section, and then there's a money section after it, but those two are separate topics that we'll end up covering individually. But the other reason I'm breaking this out is it's really significant, and we just don't appreciate it. We just don't really think about this section all that much. We're starting to look above the sun here. As Ecclesiastes 4 is winding to a close, Solomon, or whoever the writer is, Koheleth, is sitting there and meditating and thinking on what he's learned and what he's experienced, and now he's pointing to the worthlessness of all these different things that aren't going to give you proper value. He's talking about money. He's talking about giving inheritance to someone. He's talking about trying to be like a political activist. He's talking about all these different things that really won't ultimately satisfy you. And finally, he comes to this reflection of, it's under the sun just isn't cutting it. And so Ecclesiastes 5 is the first explicit time that he turns his gaze above the sun and considers the things of God. He has mentioned before, I looked out and said, if God gave you the ability to enjoy stuff, that's the best you're going to get. He's mentioned God before, sure, but this is the first time he meditates on God. And as he does so, he comes to some unconventional conclusions and observations. God has essentially been waiting for Koheleth to come before him, and now, as we approach, through the lens of Koheleth, the writer, we are approaching God from probably an unfamiliar point of view. Many of the people who listen to this in its online format, people who I'm going to preach this to on Sunday evenings, mostly Christians, mostly religious, and so we have this kind of background with God, where God is really fluffy and nice, and we always paint a flattering picture of God. Much like we always paint a flattering picture of how God's creation is perfect, but then Koheleth comes in chapter 1 and says, actually, God's creation is kind of meant to mess things up. It's kind of meant to tear you down and destroy you and break you and make sure you can't really appreciate it because it's flawed, it's messed up, right? It's beautiful in its destruction, but it's nowhere near perfect. We Christians are kind of uncomfortable thinking along those lines. But it is true, God's creation was planned with an obsolescence period where we all time out and die eventually. In the same way, we often come before God as Christians. We come before God and we think, God is really nice, God is really gracious, God is really loving, God is really cool, and I like God and all these different things. God is my best friend and he helps me through these different situations. Or sometimes we come before him and we honor him and say, well, God's not, anywhere near as mundane as my best friend, but God does help me through these different situations, and I really appreciate who God is. Koheleth is coming to this from the perspective of a man who invested a large amount of his livelihood in 1,000 different women so that he could, sleep around and do whatever he wanted with whomever he wanted. This is not a righteous person. Whether you think it's Solomon or you think it's somebody else who's lived a life of extravagance and had many concubines that he stored up in chapter 2, or many slaves that he bought, that's probably not good, or, wasting a bunch of stuff to enlarge his gardens and all these different things. This is not a man who is pleasing to God, but he's forced to come before God's throne, and as such, he does not have a flattering view of God. It's not an atheist, but it's basically a picture of like an atheist trying to describe God and how cruel he is and how terrible he is. And we understand from a Christian point of view, that's not exactly accurate, but also from a Christian point of view, not everything that they say is incorrect. How could God let bad things happen to good people? Oh, we have our explanations for that, and I believe the explanations for that, but that doesn't mean that it's not painful for bad things to happen to good people. I think I know why, or at least some of why those happen, but it still hurts to see that happen to me or one of my friends or whoever it is. So, what exactly do we do about that? How do we look at God? God is not a figure of mercy for him, for this writer, like God is often for us. God is a figure of judgment for him. But this is an opportunity to consider how we deal with him. It's a reminder God is not your best friend. He's not close to you. He is not your equal. He is not anywhere near your level. He is your authority. And you better to listen to him. Koheleth doesn't much like God, but Koheleth still respects God. And he fears him. There's a great difference in liking one person and fearing him. Let's read Ecclesiastes 5, verses 1 through 9. Guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and approach to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Do not be quick with your mouth or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God, for God is in heaven, and you are on the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. For the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of a fool through many words. When you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you do not vow than vow and do not pay. Do not let your speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger of God that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the works of your hands? For in many dreams and in many words there is futility. Rather, fear God. If you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight, for one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is beneficial to the land. We are so happy-go-lucky coming before God, doing all of our things, and then Koheleth gives us the reality check of, maybe you should just kind of shut up because God doesn't care about you. Oh, wait a second, but I'm God's child, and I'm so important, and I've been made in the image of God, and I'm a human being, and I have my dignity, and I have my personality, and I'm so significant. No, you're not. God never said that. You're not significant. He cares about you, sure. But that doesn't mean you're that important, and it doesn't mean you're as important as you think you are. Be careful when you go to God in a couple of different ways. We'll talk about three major ones. PowerPoint's not complicated, but it's still there to kind of give me a reference for where I am. We need to talk about when you come before God. What about God? How do I deal with him in prayer? Verses 1 through 3 have this question: what are you doing when you come to the temple? Guard your steps as you go to the house of God. Approach to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. What is that? Well, don't be quick with your mouth or impulsive in your thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God. He is in heaven and you are on the earth, therefore let your words be few. What is the sacrifice of fools? Draw near to listen rather than to offer that sacrifice of fools. In other words, don't be so quick to pray about everything. Well, that's curious, isn't it? From a Christian point of view, that almost seems backwards. From a Christian point of view, we have been encouraged to pray, reach out to God. How do you pray? Well, Father in heaven. Oh, there's a connection there. He's our Father. We are His children, and there's a familial, close relationship there, and it is good to pray to God. And a lot of times we spend time emphasizing how good it is to pray to God, and it is good to pray to God to an extent. But do you ever get in the position where you just kind of waste God's time? Because just because you can go to the house of God, especially in this Old Testament time period, they could do it physically in the temple. They could go to the house of God. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And maybe we need to be a little more careful about what we say and how we say it. Prayer is a good thing, but it is also easily abused. And we need to think about that for just a few minutes. When you pray, you're talking to God. What do you actually think is happening, right? Because a lot of times when we think we're praying, when I'm praying, I'll use personal examples, and then maybe you connect to these, right? When I'm praying, I'm half asleep and very tired, and I'm thinking things towards God, and then maybe I fall asleep in the middle of it. A lot of times when I'm praying, it's because, we're going before God at a mealtime, and we are thanking God for the food, and there's nothing very complicated to it. It's just kind of a routine that we do, right? A lot of times when we're praying about a specific issue, and sometimes it's really weighing on our heart, and so we just kind of repeat the same idea 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times in a row, and we're just kind of saying the same thing, and it's not actually really helping, but we are just saying the same thing, and there's kind of a mess to go along with that. A lot of times when we're praying, basically, as much as we say, I honor God and I respect God, and God's really, God is far above us, and I would never want to, demean him, but I treat God the same as I do with my friends when I text them an incomplete thought because I didn't really put effort into writing the message out. I treat them as my friends to whom I'm having a disagreement or an argument with them, and I'm repeating my point 5 or 6 times in a row because I'm just trying to make my point instead of actually, letting my friend make his. A lot of times when I'm praying, I say that I'm being respectful, and I can say the right words, and I can say Father in heaven, and I can say, to all honor and glory and praise and all sorts of stuff go to God. And then a lot of times, in my actions or how I'm praying or what I'm praying, you end up treating God as equals anyway. Even though you say all the right things, you end up treating God like he's just another human being. But where's he at? Well, he's in heaven. You're on the earth, therefore let your words be few. If God is on his throne in heaven, why would he hear you? Grace, sure. But that's an active choice God has to make. As Christians, we understand, right? It's this weird dichotomy because God is, for some reason my notes say God wants us. We understand God wants to hear us praying to him. And so that makes sense to us. But at the same time, we're not just Christians, we're humans. And as humans, we realize God doesn't need us in the slightest. It's not that our prayers or praise or thanksgiving keep him alive. It's not that us remembering him keeps him in existence, like has been suggested. It is that, God is willing to hear us out, but we're also still humans. We're puny little humans who don't actually matter that much at the end of the day. So maybe we should be careful when we go before God. When you pray, first bit of advice, go humbly. Do not go to offer the sacrifice of fools. Instead, when you draw near the house of God, you go in to listen. A lot of times when we draw near to God, or when we try to engage in drawing near to God, what we think that means is going to him to pray. There's an element of that that's true. Prayer is good. You're supposed to pray, etc. You know that. But there's also an element to, if the only times we're going to God are when we are going before him to pray, then we are treating God as if he is, our servant. We're walking into his presence, saying that he should do something, and then leaving before he can even get a word in. What kind of relationship is that? If you're always the one talking, and God never gets to get a word in edgewise. You are allowed to speak, sure, but do it carefully and briefly and concentratedly, in a concentrated manner, instead of approaching God in a half-hearted state, or approaching God when you are distracted, or approaching God when you are self-centered in some kind of selfish way where it's about what you have to say instead of what God has to say it. God is spending his time here too. God's spending his time listening to you. And if you're filling his ears with a bunch of worthless stuff, think about how agitating that is. And think about how maybe God's not going to want to listen to you the next time. Sometimes we say that time is money. If time is money, think about how valuable God's time is, and then think about how we turn around and we waste it when we come before him. And we're praying about things we don't even really know about. We're praying about things we haven't thought about. We're praying about people that we haven't reached out to. We're praying about situations that we have not interacted with. We're praying about people we don't know. There is a... You have to be careful with this, right? Because there is a sense in which it is good to offer prayers, even if I don't know a situation personally, even if I'm not intimately involved with it. Hey, I can still pray for that situation because I want to see it end up well. There's also a recognition that sometimes when we come into the presence of God, we are praying things for the sake of praying them, and we're not really praying things because we care about them. We're not respecting God's time. I guess what I'm trying to say is there is a balance of how you should be praying, whether righteously or evilly, whether you are praying to God. There's a balance in how you do it. The reason I am harping on this point so much is because we understand that there's a balance to how you should pray, but we never consider that there might be such a thing as praying too much, or if you don't feel comfortable considering that, fair enough. There might be a problem with us praying too distractedly, where our heart just isn't in it, or we just aren't aware, or we're just saying things to take them before God, even though we don't really care. We don't have any connection. We don't have any reason to pray it. It's just, oh, I heard about something, so therefore I guess I'll pray about it, but I don't really actually care about it. There's some people that are incredible prayer warriors, as we sometimes call them, who hear requests and just will take it to God and will give it to God and let God deal with it. That's incredible. A lot of us don't think in that way. And a lot of us, when we pray, are praying for ourselves for a lot of things, which is, maybe not the best focus for our prayers. Or we're just praying for everything that we can possibly think of, even though we don't actually care about the situation. And that's not good either. Prayer for ourselves is not any good. That's not how people typically pray in the Bible. And so maybe we should think about editing that down. Prayers for situations that we don't really care about might not be worth spending God's time on. It's not that at the church I work with now, there is a prayer list of people who are sick and ill and all sorts of different things. It's not that we shouldn't pray for them, but if you don't care about them, if you don't care about the people who are sick, do you really think it's a good idea to go before God and raise to his attention the people who are sick as if you care about them? Do you think that's a good idea to pretend that you care in front of God who knows you don't? If you don't care about the sick, you need to fix yourself. But maybe the prayers you should be praying are, Lord, help me to care about these people, even though I don't right now. Help me to care about them, rather than just saying, oh, I care about them so much, please heal them. Maybe those prayers don't count for much when God knows that you were just faking it. Think about how valuable God's time is. Think about the things that you actually care about and realize there's a time to bring God the things that are on your heart. And there's a time that sometimes stuff isn't really on your heart and you shouldn't be bringing it to him and wasting his time with it. It's telling in verse 3, the dream comes through much effort and the voice of a fool through many words. I think in this instance, a dream is referring to some kind of prophecy from God. Since Koheleth is setting up the opposition here as approaching to listen to God rather than to just offer the sacrifice of fools, and then you have in verse 3, the dream, listening to God, coming through much effort, but the voice of the fool through many words is the other half of that. I think he's talking about God sending words to us. It's difficult for God to communicate to us. He does it sparingly. He's done it through this book. And then we have this book, right? He put a lot of effort into crafting these words and making sure they are correct. And then he's kind of left it at that. He doesn't really talk to you through your dreams anymore, at least not that I'm aware of. God doesn't just go around spamming you with messages. So why would you go around spamming him with messages? Maybe we need to be a little wiser. Maybe we need to be a little calmer. Us sending words to God is relatively easy, but us sending meaningful words to God is not. Imagine if God had given us worthless words. Imagine if Ecclesiastes was 40 chapters long because there were 12 chapters of actual important stuff, and the other, 28 chapters were just kind of God rambling on about the same thing over and over and over again and never getting anywhere. Imagine if the Bible was filled with the worthless kinds of words that sometimes we speak in the presence of God, when we just repeat the same thing over and over and over again. If God if God spoke to you with the same care that you spoke to him, would God's words matter? If the answer is no, you need to be careful how you talk. Prayer is good. We need to pray. We need to do it, and we need to do it well when we do it. We need to pray wisely and be considerate of God and who he is. Treat God as you would want to be treated. It's as simple as that. But a lot of times, because we emphasize prayer so much, and because it is so good, sometimes I think we emphasize prayer maybe a little too much, and we go into it thoughtlessly. Meditate on that. Consider that. Correct it. Sometimes, since prayer is so good, we emphasize the action of praying and forget about the heart we should have while praying. And I don't think God appreciates that very much. Well, you need to be careful when you pray. When you bring things before God. Speaking of which, when you're praying, what you're doing is talking. Oh, let's talk about your language and how you need to be really careful how you talk. What about God in promises? What about how God deals with promises? We're talking about meaningless words. Fine. Let's talk about promises and vows that you make. Because the fact is, people run at the mouth all the time. I'm guilty of this too, especially, here I am recording something, rambling along, and sometimes it's good and sometimes often it's not. There are so many instances in which I say something and maybe it's not quite right, or maybe it's definitely not right at all, or something's getting in the way, or there's some issue, whatever it is. Lots of people are prone to talk and keep talking because, why not keep talking? There's no reason not to talk. But there is, because, as God says in the New Testament, God's going to judge you for every word that comes out of your mouth. Be careful. Do you think God forgets when you say something? Because he doesn't. Be aware that God is aware. And we do this all the time. Some people do it in terms of promises. Hey, I swear that's not how that is. Right? That would be an example. Or, hey, I promise I'm going to do this or that, or I'm not going to do this or that. People make those official promises, but people also just make statements in passing. And, Jesus says later on, I'll talk about this later, but he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Basically just a statement. If you say something, it better be true. But how many times do we not watch our language and then we say, oh, I saw that piece of cake and I just couldn't resist it. Are you sure about that? What do you mean you couldn't resist it? If it's the second helping of whatever food or dessert, yes, you can resist it. Or maybe it is a sin. Oh, I just couldn't resist. The temptation was too much. I couldn't get away from it. Yes, you can. How often do we blame accidents or outright evil that we've done on situations that we just couldn't help, when in actuality we could help them? We're just bad about actually doing so. Do you think God takes it lightly when you say, well, there was just no way out for me, I just had to do that evil thing? Do you think God approves of that? Do you think God appreciates that? When you obscure the line between truth and lies, and you pretend that things are true when they're actually not, when you pretend that sin is too great for you to conquer, when God has in fact promised that he will help you conquer if you go to him, how often do we think about the words that we say? We don't really do that. And that's probably not good. Safest course of action would be, of course, in verse 5, don't take a vow at all, don't make a promise. In other words, be careful what you say, because you don't want to say something that is not going to be true. If you do say it, then obey it. Follow it. Pay what you owe. Don't make God come and collect. Under no account take back a promise that you've made or a statement that you've made. If you refuse for any reason, well, how do you think God's going to feel about that? Do you think God's going to appreciate it when you say that you're going to do one thing and then you don't? Or when you say, hey, I will try to be there, and then you don't even try to be there? It's one thing to say, hey, I'm not sure if I will be at such and such location tonight, but I may be there, I may not be. You know, that's a true statement. There are a lot of times when someone says, I'll try to be there, when what they actually mean is, I'm not going to be there. Do you think God looks lightly on how we use our language? If you say something, pay what you owe. Under no account, take back your promise. If you refuse to pay, what do you think God's going to do to you? What do you think he's going to do when he comes and collects? In verse 6, don't let your speech cause you to sin. Don't say in the presence of the messenger that it was a mistake. Some versions, including this one, add of God. It's messenger. Maybe it's the messenger of God. It's just that word messenger. It could mean angel, I think, and so there's potentially an implication that it could be from God. It could just be from other men. If you say, yeah, I'll probably be there, and then you're not going to be there, and somebody's counting on you to be there to, fill out the numbers or to help handle a certain social situation or to bring a certain food or to whatever it is, don't make promises you're not going to keep. Don't make statements you're not going to follow. How do you think God's going to feel about it? If the messenger arrives, human or divine, and he is left wanting, how much are you going to owe God? If human creditors that you can get in debt to can take your house, how much more can God take from you if you get yourself indebted to him? What do we do with the things we promise? Be careful what you say. There's futility, worthlessness that's found in so many dreams and words in verse 7. Again, if we're implying that that dreams are from God, and then in many words it's from man, in both there is a worthlessness, there is a futility. Too much talk from either side is not good. And by the way, it's true. God tends to reveal things in snippets and bits and pieces. He tends to be pretty quiet for a reason. Oftentimes, the times in which God is most prolific and when he keeps saying stuff would be the times like the times of the prophets, in which case everyone is doing evil and no one is good and everything needs correcting, and there are tons of problems for a different reason. You would almost say it's worthless, it's evil, because everything in the world is futile. Nobody's being righteous. That's why God has to talk so much. But the fact is, everybody is trying to look for opportunities to say something good, but that doesn't really mean much, because a lot of times we say something and then we don't live according to our speech. What hypocrisy is that? God can send dreams, but it takes effort, and people need to act on them. You can say worthwhile words to God, but it takes effort, and you have to act on them. All of these things are vain if you don't, in fact, do what you're supposed to. And so, fear God. That's the conclusion of the section in verse 7. Fear God. It's going to keep you on the straight and narrow, and that's going to be what's best for you. Because, well, fear is not something to be feared. Fear is actually a tool that is something to be utilized. It is good if it is channeled righteously, if it is channeled towards God. There are a lot of people who look at God and are afraid of him and don't ever go before him, and they run away from his presence. That's not going to do you any good. At the same time, there are a lot of people who look at God, and we might say that we respect God, but we come before God and we waste his time with a bunch of inane stuff that doesn't matter, that just we're praying about it because we're not really thinking, or we're very tired, or we're distracted with other things, and we keep saying half sentences to him, and we disrespect him more than we would a family member or a friend that we were talking to. If you're watching a TV show and you decide to pray while you're watching the TV show, but you don't pause the TV show, think about it with a friend. Do you do that to your friends? Do you just keep watching whatever it is, or when you're having a serious conversation, do you pause and then turn to them and have a conversation? If you treat God worse than you treat other people, how hopeless we are. Channel your fear. Be afraid of God. Be legitimately afraid of what he can do. But channel it towards God. Make your statements refined. Be honest. That's about as good as you're going to do. Fearing is good. Fleeing from him is not. When God calls you, do not run from him. But do not just run to him and spam his inbox with so many messages, because quite frankly, he's in heaven and you're on the earth, so you should shut up and listen. That's the nicest way I know how to say it. Jesus himself quotes or references this idea in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37, where he says, don't make oaths. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. He basically says simple statements are just as binding as promises. God hears them just the same. A lot of people think the words yes and no don't mean anything, and think you have to swear on your mother's grave to be believed. Okay, if you're one of those type of people where your yes and no don't mean anything, you need to fix some stuff because it's obvious you're lying all the time. Do not join them in that. When you speak, make it honest. If you are just saying words, you are a fool. Quit. Quit with God and quit with other people. And that's where we need to come to the third point, which is we need to think about how God provides. In light of God's rule and God's awareness, we're going to reconsider oppression for just a second. I think verses 8 and 9 they fit here better than they fit with the next verses, 10 through the end of chapter 6. Of course, you can argue that this is a separate section and a slightly different topic. I'm going to combine it here because I think it makes more sense to be combined here, or maybe cut off individually instead of being combined with the next section. You need to think about oppression for a period. And again, Koheleth says, don't be surprised about it. If you see oppression of the poor, denial of the justice and righteousness in the province, don't be shocked at the sight, because there is a hierarchy of how things go. Oppression and lack of righteousness, these things will happen. There are two things to account for in this. Number one, there is a hierarchy. Officials watch over each other in verse 8. One official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. And then ultimately, of course, there's a king as well in verse 9. Is it good that there is a hierarchy? Well, it depends. There are a couple of ideas to consider about how oppression works. It may be that the king of the land is deciding the oppression, and he is pushing that agenda, and the officials under him don't want to be a part of it. That's not something you can fix. That's not something that's not as much on the officials. You could argue it's still partially their fault, sure, but it's not as much their fault as it is a fault with the king, and that's not something you can fix. The issue also may be with the subordinates and may not be with the king himself. The king may not know, and it may just be the local officials who are causing all of the problems. But either way, there is a hierarchy, and whatever you do with that, know this, that God is the authority. God knows what you speak. God knows what you think. Be careful when you come before God. God is the highest authority. He knows what ruler has done what, and he will hold all accountable. Justice will be done at the end. Be careful what you say, especially in this instance if you are in authority. God accounts for it. God judges it. God is very careful who he gives his authority to. And he's very specific that people use it in a righteous way. If you use it for evil, God will account for it. Secondly, recognize that for every bit of righteousness or evil that is done, there is a physical consequence. In verse 9, a king who cultivates the field is beneficial to the land. A king who oppresses the people is detrimental to the land, isn't he? Cultivation awaits. There's a potential to do good. If a king wants good for his land, then he can treat his land well, and he can treat his people well, and he can do these things well. And if he doesn't, if his people suffer, well, the land will too. Part of God's judgment is reserved for the eternal, ultimate judgment day, but part of God's judgment is also present on the earth too. Your sins bring consequences, even physical consequences, in the here and now. Therefore, the more evil you are, the heavier God's judgment will fall upon you, even in the immediate future. And if and when you invite wrath upon yourself by your evil actions, do not be surprised. God stands ready to destroy evil wherever it is present. If you are evil, be afraid. If you're not, there's nothing to be afraid of, because there's nothing to punish. But a lot of people are incurring evil on themselves because we don't watch how we talk. We don't watch how respectful we are of God's time. We don't really fear God in the same kind of healthy fear that we're supposed to have. We say we respect Him, and then we disrespect Him to His face. I don't think God will deal kindly with people who overstep their bounds. So when you think of God, what exactly and how exactly do you think of Him? A lot of times we think about God and we say, oh, He's nice. Well, yeah, sort of. Sometimes, depending on who He's dealing with, He can be nice. A lot of times we praise God's glory, and we praise His grace, and we praise His mercy, and in doing so, we diminish His wrath and actual consequences and judgment and all these other things. A lot of times we have floating in the idea, we know that God will judge evil, but a lot of times we also say, well, but He's also merciful and gracious, and He's really nice, and all these other fluffy, cute, happy things. We don't remember that He is balanced. And so this is a section written to remind us of the balance. I think one reason this section is so hard is it is Koheleth is coming, and he's not a righteous guy. He's kind of an evil guy who's coming before God and finally having to, answer up to all the evil, horrible things he's done. So that's one reason why this is so harsh. But I think one other reason that this is helpful in its being so harsh is it's trying to counteract. It's emphasizing judgment so much to try and counteract how much we emphasize mercy. Because we like to think about God as loving, which He is, and we like to think about God as gracious, which He is. But sometimes we preach and teach and think on that so much that we forget that God doesn't want His time wasted with a bunch of inane requests that you don't actually care about. Be careful how you pray. God doesn't want His people corrupted with a bunch of words that you don't actually account for. Because the fact is, we all like saying a lot of words, but He will judge us for every word that we say. And if that is not a sobering warning to you, then either you are a fool or you are much more careful with what you say than I am. God strikes that balance. We need to remember that balance. Remember the judgment. And that'll help keep mercy in perspective. As Christians, we are allowed to pray freely, but sometimes we take it too freely. Be cautious with what you say. Be careful. Honor your promises, yeses and nos. Don't make many official promises, or any, right? You don't have to say yes or no. You don't have to make these implications. You could just leave things general if they're supposed to be general. Just be honest. Notice the oppression in the world. Remember your limits and remember what God will do, because God is a God of balance, and you need to be a person like that as well. Pray to God, but be wise about what you say. Say things. Say yes and no. That's fine. But be wise about how you say it. That's where we'll end off today. So, thank you for listening. Hopefully there's something interesting to think about in there. I'm not exactly sure how best to express that. How do you tell Christians not to pray while at the same time telling them to pray? Because the New Testament is pretty adamant you should be praying about all sorts of different things, but also, be careful that you're not just saying stuff for the sake of saying stuff. I don't know the best balance. I hope that there's something in there for you to consider, and I hope that you're able to figure out the truth of it, even if I haven't exactly been able to quantify it in the most helpful of ways. Thank you for listening. Hopefully, you have benefited and enjoyed. God bless you, and I will see you sometime next week on Biblical Breadcrumbs.